Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending upon your time zone. Welcome to our webinar on how to instrument KPIs throughout the customer journey. I'm Seth Earley, and I'm founder and CEO of Earley Information Science, and I'm here with Allison Brown, who is one of our client partners. Allison, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Welcome, everyone. I am Allison Brown. I have been in the information architecture space for 21 years in multiple capacities on the technical side and on the business side, with being a PIM manager, an e-com manager, implementing PIM tools, lots of different aspects. And all along the way, key performance indicators and metrics have been a key part of everything that I've had to do. So really excited to do this session today.
Terrific. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we officially get started. We are recording, so you'll be able to listen to this later or pass on to colleagues. We're going to shoot for 50 minutes, although we have about 10 pounds of stuff for a 5-pound bag. So we're going to have to go a little bit at a crisp pace. We do have a couple of polls, and we'd love to get your input on those. So why do we want to track metrics? I think that's fairly obvious, but we'll give you some reasons why and maybe some new reasons. The types of things that we do want to track in terms of operational metrics and user experience metrics and how to link those together, collecting metrics at the right stage, asking the right questions throughout that customer journey, and really how we want to use those KPIs and those metrics to drive our decision-making. And a lot of organizations say they want to be data-driven, but they don't necessarily have the pieces in place for that. So when we look at building the correct metrics and having mechanisms to act on those metrics, that is critical. We can identify and quantify the impact of problems. That's what we want to do. We want to show that these issues, whatever issue we have, is impacting some metric, some operational piece. And being able to describe it in data terms is what's going to get people's attention. We also have the ability to measure and to manage our remediation and to make sure that the course corrections are correct. In fact, right? Sometimes when we fix one thing, we break something else. So when we have the right metrics, we can look at this holistically and we can make sure that we're not impacting something else negatively, and that the interventions are actually having a positive impact. We want to make sure that we can justify investments, whether it's an initial investment or an ongoing investment in technology and tools and processes and data. Many times it's hard to justify data projects, but we're going to show you some ways to do that. And of course, getting and retaining support, executive support. If people can't see the impact, if they can't see how it's actually connected to the bottom line, whether it's the top line sales or cost reduction or increase in revenue or retention, those metrics are what's important to executives. They are not going to fund things that they don't see value in. So that's what's critical. And I'm going to use these two terms somewhat interchangeably. They are different, but customer journey is really about the customer's point of view and perspective in terms of how they interact with the organization. The customer lifecycle is really looking at the customer from the organization's perspective. So, what are the types of things that they interact with? What are the systems and processes that support that journey, and how do we measure that from the internal perspective? But as I say, I'm going to make this I'm going to use them interchangeably, but we're going to talk about both internal and external perspectives. So when you look at this customer journey, the customer journey does cut across channels and different touch points, lots of different applications and systems that support that. Every part of the business is an instrumental piece in the customer journey. Even if they're not directly interacting with the customer, they're supporting something that supports the customer. Because it has that enterprise scope, we really manage this and govern it in lots of different ways, and lots of different structures, organizational processes, and so on. And as I mentioned, the journey is supported by multiple departments. And in many cases, we have different models of the customer. We're going to show you some examples of that, but each of these stages of the customer journey has a customer attribute model. There's data exhaust that comes from the systems that tell us something about the customer. And we have the ability to monitor those and to aggregate and to be able to act on those. Now, when you look at the customer life cycle, there's various stages that are common to all industries, right? People have to learn about your solution. They have to learn about your products or your services. Maybe many times that's the goal of marketing. They have to make a purchase. They have to make a selection, typically part of the sales process. They have to get that product, or they have to consume the services. So maybe it's in store, maybe it's a delivery, maybe it's a pickup, maybe they're online processes, any way that they can acquire. They need to be able to use the product or the service. And many times that requires some type of interaction, either with a service organization or a knowledge base or user manuals or whatever that might be. Of course, they need support when they have problems. So they have to get some type of assistance while they're consuming the product. And then we want to continue to engage to make those customers into advocates and to continue to build that community of customers. Now, those are the genericized types of cycles, but each industry is different. And even within an industry, two organizations could monitor and manage that life cycle differently. We could call them by different things. In insurance, it's discovery, awareness, consideration, purchase, retention, advocacy. In telecom, learn, buy, get, use, pay, support. Manufacturing, learn, choose, purchase, use, maintain, recommend. And then financial services, research, choose, apply, process, close, and service. So as I say, these are dependent upon the industry and even can vary depending upon the organization. Now, when we talk about the life cycle and the journey, usually journeys do include things like people's emotional state, what they think, what they feel, whether they're frustrated or not. So you'll see these types of up and down curves. This doesn't mean anything in this context. This is really just suggesting that there are different tools and technologies and processes that are supporting each stage of that life cycle. But if you're doing a higher fidelity map of the customer journey, then you're going to be adding other elements. We also like to describe that life cycle in metadata terms. So, Allison, do you want to take the types of...
Yeah, so let's talk about different type of metrics, especially for the folks here that are either struggling with it or somewhere midway journey. Hopefully, the facets that we're going to talk about will be really helpful. And there are two majors that we're going to cover throughout the presentation, and that is the customer-facing metrics and the internally-facing metrics. And the important key here is tying them together to make something meaningful and actionable. So there's lots of different types of metrics. You've got search and navigation. What are your customers doing on your sites? Are they saving things, or are they frequently searching for the same things? Engagement and conversion.
And search exit, by the way. Yeah. Search exit, I think, is a big one.
Yeah.
Is it because they didn't find something or did find something? What
are they doing? Yeah, what are those behaviors, and monitoring that and creating metrics around them. That engagement and conversion. This one is interesting because it often gets measured separately, like a page visit and the duration on the page. But if you're in an engagement stage and you're wanting them to read or download something, them being on that page for 2 seconds and getting that hit, that's not good, because you want them to actually read what's on that page. So if they're bouncing in and out, especially in an engagement scenario, that could be something, that you need to measure together with those page visits. So tying them together is important. Content and data quality, monitoring the number of downloads that you're getting. What are they downloading and what are they finding interesting? Maybe you need more of that on your site and to engage them further. New product launches. This one goes typically across many departments, as does most of the customer journey. Time to launching a campaign could go all the way back to product data, your CRM, lots of different tools involved and lots of different teams involved. So measuring that across from beginning to end is super important. Customer service. an ever-changing and growing definition behind what service means and what customers are calling good service. Time per incident is one thing, but customer satisfaction could be a combination of how much they could self-serve versus having to call someone if they really want to talk to someone, depending on the industry. And if it's something that's heavy in detail and content, and speaking to someone could be a good thing, and that could be the place to close. So that's a complex place to measure. And
I just want to make one comment here. Sometimes you can have, well, many times you have metrics that are in conflict, or you want low time per incident, but then you want first call resolution and you want customer satisfaction. So if the customer satisfaction goes up, maybe the time per incident is going to go up as well.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point, Seth. Yeah. And then supply chain management is interesting too, because there's lots of facets of a supply chain. There's the physical supply chain and there's the digital supply chain, and those delivery rates and quality could be measured differently across those two different facets.
And data quality, as Allison mentioned, the physical supply chain is an information supply chain. And if you're not getting good information from your suppliers, you need to score that. You need to be able to use that as part of your vendor evaluation and vendor decision-making process. Many organizations don't do that, and then they're stuck with the bad data problem. Push it back to your vendor, push it back to your supplier so that they can do that. Here's the point. When we start looking at our metrics and our KPIs and our data and our analytics, there's no shortage, right? There is a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of stuff that's not, how do you separate the signal from the noise? What is meaningful? What can you act on? And what do you want to surface for your leadership and for your stakeholders? So the key here is to say, what do we segment out? What do we pay attention to? How do we aggregate this? Allison, do you want to walk us through this linkage?
Yeah. So, speaking of a problem, let's talk about an example. The metrics tell us something. And a lot of the time, the challenge is, what is it trying to tell us? How do we interpret this trend going up or down, and what to do about it? So one example is a high bounce rate. There could be multiple causes to a high bounce rate, and trying to understand all of the reasons could be a challenge. And sometimes you have to double click into the reasons. The user was in the wrong place, for example, then it's why were they in the wrong place? Was it the taxonomy? Was it the search? Was it the keywords? Was it something else? So trying to figure these out, labelings being misleading, something not being clear on the content itself, on the page, it's not what they were looking for. So trying to diagnose the reason and finding the root causes of a metric can be challenging, but it's important to double and triple click into those causes to get a better understanding.
And you need to think about the context. You need to know what happened before and what happened after. If somebody goes to a page and then they bounce out, well, maybe they found what they needed, right? And maybe they're picking up the phone to call their sales rep and say, oh, I see exactly what I need. But again, they could be pogo sticking for some other reason, and it's understanding the context of that. Yeah. Allison, you want to grab this one?
Yeah, sure. So I love this one. It's our marketing program is clearly successful, as shown by this graph on how awesome I think it is. And it's exciting because I actually had an experience of a company trying to make this graph just the other day. I was shopping. I only needed a couple of items. I was in a neighborhood or coming through that I don't normally go to. So I was like, oh, I'll just stop and get these couple of things on my way home. I go through the store, I get my items, I get to the checkout, and it was only a couple of items. So nice young lady, 60 seconds, I'm all done. And she goes, get the receipt. And she says, can you fill out this survey about your experience with me today? And I'm like, my experience with you? It was really short. You just, is that what the survey is? Just about my experience with you? She's like, yeah, it's questions about, were you greeted when you came in? Did I ask you this? Did you find what you were looking for? That sort of thing. So it was just about the experience. With the associate, which was very interesting because we didn't look at my whole journey. The store was actually really filthy. I regret stopping in there. I did get what I needed, but I definitely won't be going back. So if that survey was to ask me about my entire experience, I would tell them that I'm probably not coming back. It was pretty gross in here, even though the lady was really nice. It was terrible, but that wasn't the question. The question on the survey is just about my experience with the associate. So that's just an example of, you need to capture more than one metric, or having a high metric here doesn't mean that you're doing really great. Are you looking at the full scope of the customer experience and putting measurements and actually asking your customers about the right things?
Yes, that's a great point. And you mentioned to me that you did put this in the comments. However, because you gave it a good rating for the multiple
the questions that they asked me,
on the checkout person, right, the service person, but that's probably not going to surface because they're going to look for something bad. They're going to look for, oh, hey, great score. We're not going to bother with those comments. So they completely missed the boat in terms of why you will not go back to that store. Hey, look, our ratings are so good. Why are you losing traffic, right? Why don't you have people? So that's the problem. Now, my story about this is actually about a company whose executives wanted to have a certain type of a hierarchy. The old saw or saying of he or she who yells the loudest gets their product the highest in the hierarchy, right? In the navigational structure. That's not the best way to do things, by the way. But we did have some metrics and some testing that showed that was not the best navigational structure. The executives tried to ask the questions in different ways to try to get, the answers they wanted, and the data still came back as, nope, that's not a good idea, right? Even though they tried to manipulate the questions in such a way to get the answer. At the end of the day, they did it anyway. They said, you know what? This is what we want. And guess what? It was the wrong structure. The data, the subsequent usability and performance and commerce data, the actual revenue results showed that it was wrong. Okay. So the point here is that you also have to be prepared to not get the answer you want, right? And to explain the methodology and to explain why it's important to do things this way. Let's keep going. We've got a lot of greetings here from folks across the country.
Hey, everybody.
Great.
I love it.
I know. So, when you think about it, there's lots of things. We have to connect this to strategic goals. And by the way, I meant to have a citation here. Carol Borghese was a contributor to an original workshop that she and I had put together on customer analytics. So I do want to credit her with this slide. And then there's another one I'm going to also credit her. I should have had it in the bottom. When we distribute the slides, I will have that. But this is my official recognition of her contribution. Customer feedback, employee behavior. We talked about knowledge. We're going to talk about knowledge-based metrics in a little bit. But what is it? What are the customers saying about the employees, such as Allison's story? The process performance. Get first-time resolution, as we mentioned, system uptime, cycle time, total cost to serve, product performance. Now, what's important here is just select the right metrics depending upon your strategic goal. If you're saying customer satisfaction is what we compete on, high levels of customer service, then you got to ask those questions, right? And ask the questions in a broad enough way. And so it really is dependent upon your competitive strategy. It really is dependent upon your positioning and what you're trying to achieve. Now, let's talk about this. Here's where we start to look at the connections between the high-level outcomes and the details in the weeds. So let's imagine that we're trying to do a taxonomy or knowledge management project, trying to fix our knowledge, to use that example. And the CEO says, how is this going to increase revenue? And you're like, it's not, right? Or how's it going to reduce costs? Well, we think it will, but we can't really show you. So what do you do with that? You have to show the linkage, right? Because when we're working in the weeds on stuff, we're working in things like knowledge bases, and you can measure knowledge quality, or you can measure the completeness. You can measure whether people find the answer and whether it was helpful. In a call center example, we had the call rep actually grade the knowledge. They said they would for a call, they would indicate whether or not they used the knowledge base. Now, this was second tier support. If they did not use the knowledge base and they answer off the top of their head, that means first tier support should have been able to answer with the knowledge base. The other choice was that, so whether they used it or not. The other choice was whether the knowledge was there or not. So if they needed it and they tried to find it, but it wasn't there, that's another score where the knowledge is not available. The knowledge could be there, but it could be not helpful. So knowledge not helpful is another type of a score. Or, so it's there, but it's not helpful. So you weren't able to use it in that call to solve that problem. Or it was there and it was helpful. And guess what? You correlate that with time per incident. And the time per incident for when knowledge was available and it was helpful was 50% of the time per incident when it was not there or was not helpful, right? So it's intuitive, it makes sense, but that's where you can get hard data. So
yeah.
Go ahead, Trent.
Yeah, I was just going to add, just to double click on the question that we had about measuring knowledge. As you double click into that and we start to move up this chart, there are other parts of it, like is it extensible? Is it just the call center that's able to use this great knowledge, even if it's good, and is it findable? Is it being used across the organization, whether it's for the customer or in other departments to service other things? Is it architected in a way that it can be used for voice or chatbot? So there's lots of other measurements that you can kind of add on top of it to make sure that not only are you doing it good, are you adding value throughout the organization with the knowledge that you have?
Absolutely. So knowledge usage, right? And knowledge ratings, alignment with the questions, use cases. Can you define the use cases? Everybody should be building libraries of use cases because you can test everything with use cases. They have to be testable. They have to be specific. They have to be based on role. And therefore you will be able to do that. And I hope that answered your question. If you have a follow-on question, please let us know. Now, we started talking about data and data quality and content quality and knowledge quality. You can also measure search relevance and accuracy and so on. And those data scorecards are important because they tell you how you're progressing, where you are today and how you're progressing. However, the data and content supports a business process. And this is where we want to measure the business process indicators. What are we impacting? First call resolution, knowledge base usage, abandonment, and so on. And again, this can cut across all these areas. I just happen to have knowledge base in here, but it's any of these things. It could be conversions, right? It can be, revenue. It can be, not revenue because that's at the next level, but it can be conversions. So, but process is in support and enables a business objective. So that's where we start looking at, renewals or repeat revenue, repeat customers, or, the outcomes. And I like to quote Chris Penn, who says, my part is you either get bonused at this level, and Chris Penn's phrase is, or you catalyze a resume generating event. I love that. So a resume generating event can happen here. But the business objectives align with enterprise strategy, and we have to have that linkage all up and down the food chain. We have to have that linkage. Even the things that seem completely obvious to you, that you think everybody's going to know that this is a no-brainer, this is obvious. No, it's not. People say, oh, I don't want to be Captain Obvious. I'm sorry, you have to be Captain Obvious, Lieutenant Obvious, General Obvious. You have to point these things out. It's really important. People don't necessarily know that. So when we start looking at this, and Allison, do you want to just talk through this little animation here?
Yeah, sure can. So there has to be drivers to decision making, and you do have to be able to articulate what those drivers are with publishing and updating these metrics and making sure people understand them, collecting them and understanding those outcomes, assessing and having a target. In that slide where all of the different metrics were popping up, a lot of times no one really understands what that line going up or down really means and where are you trying to go with it. So that establishing that is really huge, and continue to improve and iterate on that. Test, evaluate it, and start that cycle again. And
there's two ways to think about this. So one is the metrics themselves, and the other is the actual content or whatever your intervention is. There was another slide we had here that we took out, but it's really looking at, what do you think is going to impact this? And it can be lots of different things. And then you have to share those metrics. You do have to publish them for consumption at the right level of granularity. And then again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to measure the impact on the things that we're changing and the things that we're updating. So it's a cycle. It's really shampoo, rinse, repeat. Now, if we look at this across that life cycle, I mentioned that we're going to talk about how you think about the entire journey, the entire life cycle. We have these journey stages at the top, then we have the departments that are responsible for those. Then we have the processes within those departments, the accountabilities, what are they actually trying to do and what are those outcomes? And we have the technologies, and we can score the deployments, we can score the quality of the data, we can score the quality of the deployments, the utilization. And this is where we actually have this methodology for evaluating the entire marketing technology stack. That's going to be next month's webinar, by the way. But we can do this, and when you start looking at this, it actually is my metrics layer cake flipped upside down. So there's the data technology scorecards. There are the process scorecards, and there are the outcome scorecards. The accountabilities are the outcome scorecards, process. So this is where you can start creating dashboards and metrics across every stage of this life cycle. This is critical. This is critical. What you're doing is because one department could be doing something that's impacting another department's metric. And this is where you get a holistic view. I know it's very difficult. It's very hard to do this. It took one organization just to get from data to process. It took them about 2 years. Here's another slide that Carol Borghese helped me with. And this is an example of likelihood to recommend. And what I did is I just chose a couple of journey states. I just chose learn, use, pay, support. But what this is showing you is that when you get voice of the customer feedback, you have to disaggregate that. You have to extract the entities and extract the important things. You have to classify them. This is text analytics and classification. And so what we're doing is we're saying, well, what are people saying about the reputation when they're learning about this company? What was the message out in the marketplace? Right? And brand reputation, corporate responsibility, those are all part of that perception and that public face. When we use the products, right, we want to make sure they're reliable and there's ease of use. So these are drivers and sub-drivers. And so this is part of the use stage. And then we have pricing and transparency, whether it's competitive pricing and the billing it makes sense and is clear and understandable. That again is part of that metric. So you can really take this voice of the customer data, you can do analytics on the content, on the text, and you can extract these details and these insights. And this will help you measure every stage very objectively, because you're extracting it. Even if the customer experience is subjective, you still are measuring it consistently, and you're getting analytics that you can then use as a baseline. Now, we also have to combine these things. This is an example around the product data space. And the product data space, when we think about product data has to be important, it has to be clear and appropriate and complete. And when we have incomplete product data, we don't have enough product data. If you're a distributor or you're a manufacturer and your distributor doesn't have product data, guess what? Your products are invisible, right? They don't exist. Or if they can't find it, they can't buy it. But we also have the content that's supporting this, and we have to have an integrated framework. Many times, content analytics and the analytics from product data are not necessarily connected, and they're collected and aggregated. We have to have shared dictionaries. We have to have a center of excellence or a community of practice. We have to have the ability to report on this and to analyze. And what we're doing here is we're creating the right level of granularity for the right audience. The analytics team is going to need the detail. They're going to need to go into the weeds. The digital leadership wants to know, those processes and how those processes are doing. The executives want the outcomes. So you're really creating these tiers of experience and consumption around this data, and you're publishing it at these different levels. And again, as you publish it, when we talked about that cycle, you're publishing changes, but you're also publishing the analytics and the data and the insights, and you're getting feedback from that. So you're really looking at both of those pieces, and you're not going to invite an executive to, a meeting of the analytics team if, their eyes are going to glaze over. It's not going to work. So when we think about this, about capturing information, how do we learn about the customer? Well, we capture information about the customer throughout their journey. It's the customer experience. It's that marketing technology stack. It's that customer experience stack. It's that e-commerce stack. Now, I say enriching with third-party data sources. I'm not talking about necessarily cookie data, because that is going away, but you can have reference data, you can have industry data, you can have demographic or firmographic. There's still stuff that's going to be available from third parties, but you're going to also observe those details, observe those behavior, and infer things about that. Now, when we do that, and actually we have to set this up before we do that, but how do we describe the customer? So we're capturing this information, but we need to build a metadata model for the customer. Are they large? Are they small? Are they new? Are they existing? Are they professional, consumer, bargain hunter, free spender, segment? What's their industry? What's their sector? Each of these tools, each of the pieces of your MarTech stack, your e-commerce stack, your CX stack, have data exhaust. I call it data exhaust. It's the data they throw off. They throw off lots of data. And if we're not capturing it in a metadata model that we can act upon, then we're wasting that data. We're not making use of it. There's all this data coming out. And if we can't structure it and use it to act upon and infer, then that is a problem. Allison, you want to grab?
Yeah, sure. And to add on to that last slide, the needs are different across those segments. So being able to understand what they are and then building those support tools and mechanisms throughout the journey is super important. And part of building that is knowing what it is and knowing where to get it, knowing your digital body language. So that technology stack, what you have and how they connect and where they connect to be able to weave together that journey is super important. And it can be complex, but understanding where they connect your SEO and your site search and the content that you have with the actual customer experience. And that other chart, we showed things coming in and out of the journey, during their learn process, there's inputs and there's outputs of it, and knowing what tools you have and how they're impacting that journey is super important.
And as I mentioned, many times that stack is so complex, has so many elements, and there's a lot of shadow IT that goes on in marketing technology. There's a lot of tools that are not fully utilized because maybe they don't have the right data sources or data quality. Maybe they're not integrated well. Maybe you don't have the supporting processes. We've done personalization projects where we built the metadata model, the content model, and then the customer did not, when we built the segments, like, okay, what's differentiated personal experience? They didn't know. It was the same message for everybody. They could not differentiate. And so they were lacking maturity in that process. So when you think about this, and Allison, do you want to just walk through some of this, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. And back to that other slide, I was just going to add and tie that into KPIs, is that there are ways to measure the effectiveness of each of those things in your customer journey. And every business is different. And we have done some journey maps where we see, the content management tool is actually low impact for this customer type, where the
or for that stage of the journey.
Impact. Yeah.
Or that stage of the journey, yeah.
Yeah, and it has different impacts across, so that can also be measured. So, capturing that behavioral data across the ecosystem is super important. And, some examples of the relationships to be made is the sales behavior and their actual purchases, the approaches and how they're finding your products and solutions and what they're doing after they make their purchase, responding to the individual variations and the messages that you're getting out of these tools and from the customer, and the metadata and the patterns, analyzing that metadata, having it as one thing and saying, yep, this is what they're doing, making things actionable. If they're, performing this way or behaving this way, here's what we want to do, whether it's nurture them or redirect them or whatever it is, you should have a target on each of these behaviors.
Yep, absolutely. And all of these things are, you can correlate. You may not have causation, but you have correlation, and that's okay, right? But the point here is that we can change things like our messaging architecture, and then we can measure the impact of that. We can change things when we are making recommendations, and we can adjust that as well. Now, here's where we start running into the problems with data quality. Different parts of the organization are going to describe their and they're going to describe the customer in different ways. Many times they're not consistent in the process, in the definition. A lot of times different terminology will be used because sorry about that. Many times different terminology will be used because these systems grow up independently and the attributes are not defined in advance so that we have a consistent model. And of course, how do we use those attributes? How do we understand them? How do we act on them? This is called activating insights, personalizing the content, directing, targeting it, building out those cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Oops. And of course, when we start having that nuanced understanding of the customer, we can serve them better. We have much more latitude. We have much more specificity and granularity. Oops, that allows us to do this. So here's the big takeaway. Well, first of all, we know cookie data is going away. No more cookies. I like crispy. I like crispy chocolate chip cookies, not like a soft.
I like soft ones. Fresh.
No, why does the cookie crumble? Why did they say that? Because cookies are crispy. Anyway, that's my argument for another day, another webinar. But privacy protections by governments and by Google and Apple and all of these things that are happening are changing the ecosystem and forcing organizations to capture their own data. Guess what? This is the way it should be done in any case. And having cookie data and being able to target that way, that was kind of a blunt instrument in a lot of ways. You could precisely target something, but you're not really learning about the customer, not really acting on that knowledge. So now you're going to be forced to act on that. You're going to be forced to capture that knowledge. People are rushing to create their own information models for the customer and using it. And guess what? This is better data anyway. You guys have better data in your organizations because we have to be able to capture what we know from their interactions. That's first-party data. We can still enrich it, as I mentioned, but it's first-party data. So we have objective and subjective. I also like to I sometimes classify these as slow-moving and fast-moving, but there's descriptive data that is unambiguous, and then there's descriptive data that can be interpreted and that can be monitored or inferred. So here's some objective attributes, customer type, master data, account details, content preferences, equipment, and there's some examples of the types of metadata, right? So that's just explicit stuff, and many times it doesn't change very quickly. Then we have behavioral data and subjective attributes. So we can do things like say, well, are they high value? Are they high growth? Are they, what's their historical purchase history, their purchase history that we can infer something about this? What can we do about understanding those? Their loyalty. We can mine things from social media. We can look at their motivations. We can look at whether they are brand aware or price sensitive or and so on. So we have the ability to build these very, very rich attribute models. And what we have to do, people talk about single view of the customer. Single view of the customer means that we have harmonized attribute models. It means we have integrated data across those systems. It means we're using consistent terminology. And the customer metadata is as important as product metadata. We know product metadata can be a big challenge and a big problem. And we have to put the same amount of focus and intention around customer data and customer attributes. It requires that we have mature data functions and governance processes and policies, and we have to have the analytics capability so that we can make sense of this. And this is what a single view of the customer could look like in terms of the attributes. It's a very rich model. It has dynamic segmentation, behavioral segmentation, strategic segmentation. Someone asked about geographic attributes. By the way, you can, with even Google Analytics, you can see where people are coming from. So you get a regional view, and it's based on IP address. So that's stuff you can harvest. And what we're talking about is harvesting additional information based on registrations, based on asking questions, based on inferring things, and so on. So we are coming down to the wire here. And one of the main points that I want to make here is that doing this appropriately requires that we have a consistent information architecture. This is a reference model. And basically what this is saying is, as we build our systems, as we replatform, as we upgrade, as we migrate, as we have a new initiative, we have to base that on standards. We have to base it on an information architecture that covers structured and unstructured information. Now, this is a big ask, right? This is a big deal. This is aspirational. This is the North Star. But you can build it incrementally over time. You're going to have to do this. Over time, this is not a nice to have. This is a need to have, especially when we look at artificial intelligence, machine learning. You know, that's not going to solve these problems. You can't say, oh, I don't need taxonomy anymore because I'm going to have AI. Well, guess what? AI needs reference data, okay? And so when we are trying to create this, we can't have acts of heroics. There's still humans involved, acts of heroics upstream, and expect a digital seamless customer experience externally. So part of what we want to do, Allison, did you want to run through these?
Yeah, I'll take the best practices. And I have to say, I'm glad that cookies are going away because the internet thinks I'm someone that I'm not. I shop, they do. I shop for food and I look at recipes so I know what to order, not because I'm going to actually cook it. So I get all kinds of ads for things that I will never buy and use. So that's a good thing. So like you said, it's important to use what you actually know about the customer and their purchases and their behaviors directly with your company to build, those insights about their behaviors for sure. So some of the best practices is to connect to the areas of the organization that are tracking those KPIs, because those data owners are going to be the ones, that are going to help with this entire process. Creating a model that you understand about your customers' real behaviors, not just their search history. What are they actually doing? And what are they clicking on? What are they reading? How are they interacting with you? Are they calling? What is it that they're doing versus what is it that you're wanting them to do to get them through the customer journey happily and successfully? And validating those understandings using your metrics, capture that data, and you're going to have to capture it in multiple places. That's why there's multiple tools, multiple departments. Pulling it together is how you're going to get there. And what you're not collecting, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I clicked the wrong thing.
Yeah, and if you're not collecting data, determining where you can collect it across the journey too, so that you can map that journey out. Introduce those customer analytics, the traffic and the conversions, hypothesize about their behaviors. If they're doing this, then probably something. So you have a story to tell. And if it's not being told, that you're creating the right experiences to tell the story that you want about your customers and to drive the behaviors that you're looking for, tied to a decision-making framework. Absolutely. So back to those charts that have graphs going up and down. Is there something to do and test and validate? Just having the number is not quite enough, and it doesn't tell a story. So you have to build that story around it and define clear ownership of the technology and the processes and the overall capability. It has to be understood for you to weave everything together.
And I'll tell you, the whole decision-making framework, we have a metrics-driven governance playbook. It's about 150 pages. And it really builds out like how you make decisions based on your metrics. And it's not a one size fits all. Of course, the ownership is going to show you where you can get funding and budget allocation. The bottom line is that customer analytics programs and the ability to capture those metrics and to instrument those KPIs throughout that journey require that you have the data. And you need to be able to measure and understand the data quality so that you can get meaningful results out of this. And of course, it's always necessary to measure, test, and manage and make sure those sources go upstream to the sources. It costs about 10 times as much to do a remediation after the fact. Here's some do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You want to run through the
I'll take the do's.
I'll do the don'ts.
Yeah, so being consistent in those definitions and explanations, and the explanation of the impact is important. It is not unusual for one department to describe things and look at things differently than another, and it's usually for purpose, but there has to be a thread. There has to be a thread for you to be able to map your customer journey. Communicate in plain language and summarize in those visuals. You know, having tons of charts and graphs is one thing, but being able to explain what it means to the bottom line, to the organization's objectives is super important. Separate business rules from the systems. So yeah, there are things that can be automated and coded, but there are also business rules across the organizations that if we're going to engage a customer this way, here's how we're going to behave, here's what we're going to present to them. It's not all about clicking buttons and the technology involved. And involving those data owners, they know more best what it is, and getting deep into the weeds and letting them share with you, and creating that data driven organization. It's going to start with involving those data owners.
And the don'ts, I'm almost violating the first one here by mixing positive and negative on this slide.
Yes, we got them both.
Yeah, you want to be consistent in how you explain things. If you have a metric, use the same. I've seen reports that are confusing because they're saying, well, this was a better, but this declined, and it's confusing when you use positives and negatives in the same report. But you just have to see if it makes sense. Make sure that you write rules for the dimensions of your metrics. In other words, start with completeness and then expand from there, meaning you want to make sure you understand all of the dimensions of your data, and you can get into more granularity about those different dimensions. And you have to also think about, don't forget to assign metadata to the rules, because you want to periodically review them. You want to know who owns them, what tools they belong to, anything about the data provenance. And then you want to make sure that they don't get out of date. So you need to be able to have that administrative metadata on those rules. So when we want to build get that buy-in, we have to make sure that we are building that business case, understanding those problems, making sure that we have those outcomes and we're modeling those. A lot of times the prioritization approaches, when you're starting to have conversations, catalyzing conversations about where to focus the efforts, that actually is very that yields a lot of insights and gets people on the same page.
Yeah, sure. So engaging the organization, back to the do's and don'ts, you do want to use plain language, and you don't want to over engineer into technical terms. You want to engage by, making sure that people understand what the objectives are, how they tie to the business goals, and what the impacts are going to be.
When you think about the stakeholders, remember it's what's important to them. Right? It's always the what's in it for me. And having that holistic view shows how those metrics will interact, but at the same time, they have to be segmented appropriately. So again, what's the right level of granularity for that audience, and what's important to them? And only if there are other metrics that are related to that do you want to start talking about those. But make sure you stay on message from that perspective.
Yeah, and building those metric scorecards and dashboards to course correct, decide on interventions and show progress is really huge. So just having a graph is one thing, but what is the action? Being able to explain what it is and what it needs to be and what you're going to do about it, and show that change over time. Point in times, typically useless. So you're going to want to make sure you have a scorecard and a dashboard that is very explanatory, and people can understand what it means and what it means to the organization and the goals.
Oops. So that's kind of it. What I want to do is take some more questions here. And one of the questions that we have is, and let me go ahead and, is there any stuff? Yeah, here's some resources that you can grab. Oh, and the book. Don't forget to buy the book. Buy the book, buy the book, buy the book. Lots of great things about the book. There's our contact information, but I do want to answer one of the questions that came up. Can you use metrics to target customers, decide who to target? Absolutely. Because what you're doing is when you're building those rich attribute models, you can then understand not only who the targets are, like if you take the model that shows here is our ideal customer. Ideal customer is described in metadata, in attributes. They are this size business, it's this role, having these interests and this type of equipment. What that does is it says, here are my really good customers. Well, let me find more of those. So you use this metadata and these attribute models and this customer analytics in order to target the customer and to see what messages work, right? You're constantly getting feedback from this. So if you target that segment based on the metadata that you have, again, you need to say, well, where do I get that? Where do I get those targets? Again, that's lead gen, and that's looking at trade shows, conferences, webinars, stuff like that. But then when you get those leads, then you have to say, okay, who is it? Who do we want to prioritize on? And you can prioritize based on the title. You can prioritize based on the company size. If you're serving smaller businesses, don't go after a Fortune 500 company, and vice versa. So yes, so that's absolutely important to be able to use that. You are quite welcome, Wayne. Wayne thanked me for the answer. Do we have any other questions? What other questions? I mean, usually the where do you get started part is a good question. And I say you start with what's important for the business, and you start anywhere. You start looking at the analytics that you have instrumented already. Many people have Google Analytics. Then you have to start saying, okay, what are we going to be looking at? How do we correlate all of this data with a business problem? Again, maybe it's bounces. Maybe you have to look at the data and see what the data is telling you, but you also know what problems you have in the business. If sales are declining, or you're losing customers through attrition, or they're defecting, or whatever that might be. You want to be able to look at that problem and then say, okay, what else can we do? By the way, connect with me on LinkedIn. I always love to talk shop. Let me put up these. You're going to see stuff anyway in the slides. Allison, did you want to add any other notes?
No, I was gonna just to follow on to that last point is how to get started. It's definitely a look across. A lot of times companies start somewhere by looking at their product data, or looking at e-commerce, or looking at one of the areas. And like you said, a place to start is the problem, because the problem typically involves lots of departments. So the solution is going to involve lots of departments as well. And there's ways to incrementally get through that and determine how you're going to move through the stages to grow and change and solve over time.
And by the way, we do have a workshop that we do on site for organizations. It can be a half day or full day, just teaching these concepts. So, reach out to Allison. I'll give you her contact information. It's just allison.brown@earley.com. I think that's it for today. We do have the recording. We'll have that available in a couple of days. So I appreciate your time on this, Allison and Sharon, for keeping the show going here, and all your hardworking contributions. And thank you to everyone who has attended. And with that, I'm going to give you 1 minute back to your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.